Hello! I wanted to show you the creation of a page in my graphic novel series called Crossing Horizon. So I'm just going to show you the whole process from beginning to end, and I hope you find it interesting. So as you can see, everything starts out as nothing but text on a screen. This is the script for the whole series. I wrote this a few years ago, back in 2018. It consists of 40 chapters and it's about 52,000 words currently, but it's ever-changing. I have dialogue written in bold, and everything else not bolded is going to be the content of the drawings. This stage is where I separate everything into chapters and pages. Today we're going to be working on a page in chapter 3, which consists of this paragraph. The next step is to start planning out images by sketching them into a rough storyboard. This is the storyboard for chapter 3. Storyboarding ensures that all my panels for a given chapter can fit together like a puzzle, without any pages that are too full or too empty. And this is the page we'll be working on today. So I just take some cheap paper and draw out some quick sketches of what I have in mind. As you can see, it's nothing but stick figures at this point. I don't put a lot of effort into the actual drawings here because the idea is just to create a composition that I like and organize the panels, artwork, and text in a way that's expressive but also easy to read. At least that's the goal. Once I have my storyboard, I can move on to the paper I'm going to be drawing the actual page on. I use 11 by 17 Strathmore Bristol paper. This is the standard aspect ratio size for comic books. The first step here is to draw out my panels. I always try to leave a decent amount of room around the edges because if I don't, Amazon gets mad when I try to publish. That was a lesson we learned the hard way. Jess spent a long time digitally adding more white space or artwork around the edges of each page while still keeping the same aspect ratio. It was a lot of work for her. Thank goodness Jess can do math. Next, I move on to drawing my characters. This is Chet and Rigidella. These are the two very talented actors who play every character in Crossing Horizon. But they're a nightmare to work with. Temperamental, demanding, they completely fall apart over the smallest thing. I carefully position them in the ways that I want, and then it's time for the photo shoot. At this point, I usually just trace the outline of the models in my pictures right off my computer screen. This gives me a good skeleton to start with, and then I just eyeball it to adjust them to match each of my characters' specific body types and face shapes. Now it's finally time for my favorite part, which is turning these faceless freaks into my characters, adding their expressions, hair, clothing, and other details. Almost everything from the original model outline gets changed in this stage, but that original outline is still helpful to me because it gives me a place to start and it helps keep my characters proportionate and consistent. I reference my storyboard a lot because it acts as my roadmap to remind me where I'm going with each panel. In this panel, Fiona is looking appalled at something Theo has done, as usual. So this is just kind of a wordless jaw drop, and I'm just working it until she looks sufficiently aghast, I suppose. I I didn't like the hand from my model here, so I decided to draw it in a different position. Sometimes I don't know what the heck I want until I actually see it. I've drawn my characters so many times at this point that I don't typically use any references or copy anything anymore, though maybe I should use more references for things like clothing. I'm definitely not an expert in comic art. I only started doing this a couple years ago, and I'm self-taught by basically just watching and reading a lot of cartoons, comics, and manga, and watching drawing tutorial videos on YouTube. I'm constantly learning new things and discovering new weaknesses. I look back on pages I did 3 months ago and cringe because they had so many problems I didn't see at the time, and I'm sure I'll do the same thing about this page in a few months. It kinda sucks, but that just means you're learning, right? It took me a while to decide on Theo's expression here. Ultimately, I decided on this one, which is, what would you call this? False innocence? Condescending? Mocking? I don't know. So you push yourself over, but Fiona's not having it. She's put up with his nonsense for too many decades, and Theo's getting in her face a little more overtly now. This kind of stuff is really fun to draw. Okay, so my characters are all drawn out in pencil, and now it's time for inking. For my panel lines, I use a micron pen because they're smooth, precise, and they don't bleed with water, which is important because I often use watercolor for my backgrounds, and I really don't want my panel lines to bleed. For the artwork itself, I use Tombow brush pens. I like brush pens because I love being able to taper my lines, or draw lines that vary in thickness based on how hard you press down. I think it gives it an elegant, stylized look, but it requires a very steady hand, which I don't always have. I just try to not hold my breath and hope for the best. And when I inevitably make mistakes, I use white gel pen to correct my lines. Now that everything is outlined in pen, I'm just gonna erase all the pencil underneath. And it's time for shading or toning. I use Tombow grayscale brush pens for this. These are pretty cool because they're water-based, so they can be blended with water, kinda like watercolors. That blending comes in handy a lot. So this is just a matter of shading wherever logically would be shaded with my light source in mind. I'm also filling in darker clothing and hair. It works best to start with lighter values and then gradually move darker. And again, I'm just using white gel pen to make corrections and add highlights. Most comic book artists seem to do this part digitally, and maybe that's the smarter way to do it, but I never claimed to be smart. I have such a hard time with digital art because I get impatient trying to learn programs and shortcuts. It's confusing to my brain to draw on a horizontal tablet and have it appear on a vertical screen. I also find tablets slippery and I struggle to control my lines. It's just not my thing. Drawing on paper is obviously less forgiving, but there's something about the tactile nature of traditional drawing that I need. Thankfully, I have a sister who is an extremely talented digital artist, and she takes care of that part. You'll see that in a little bit.
It takes a priestess to hold him down, but I've got nothing to lose. 'Cause I keep hearing them rustic pipes sickening Jew.
So now my characters are finished. The next stage is the background art. For this page, we're going to be keeping the background very simple with softer lines and lighter values, so it doesn't overwhelm the characters. I usually do more detailed background artwork around the beginning of a scene in order to establish a location, or just whenever the setting needs to shine. These pages are some examples of that.
Upstairs, I bet you see them too, vanishing to air.
But for pages like this one, I want my characters, their expressions, and the dialogue to be the primary focus. So I'm just going to be throwing in some vague trees and plants so my characters aren't just floating in space, and so we can be reminded of where they are, which is in the garden.
In the moonlight, you hear them whispers now, that's right.
I'm going to use some black watercolor and a paintbrush here to just dapple in some leafish type shapes, keeping it very simple.
Yeah, off with it, off with it. Having trouble to rest, it seems the trouble inside. It takes a priestess to hold him down, but I've got nothing to lose. I keep hearing them rustic pipes sickening Jew.
This is the end result of the drawn portion of this page. At this point, I pass it on to my sister Jessica, who digitizes it, enhances the artwork, and fixes all my mistakes. This is where the real magic happens.